As director of the Running Mead Society, the principle that campus debates and discourses set the parameter for our legal, political, and cultural conversations is one that I take to heart very closely. And in fact, it's also the case that free speech on campus is beleaguered on a level and tone of which we haven't seen since probably the 1960s. Safe spaces and trigger warnings are commonplace. A Harvard law professor wrote in the New Yorker last year that many of her colleagues no longer teach the law of sexual assault because of the onslaughts of complaints that they know that they would receive. Closer to home and on this campus, of course, Professor Jordan Peterson has been the subject of censure up to and including his employment for his expressions of refusing to adopt chosen gender pronouns. So it's really my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Ari Cohn, who joins us from the Windy City, Chicago, and I told him earlier, brought the wind chill with him, must have done. He is the director of the Individual Rights Defense Program for the Foundation of Individual Rights in Education. He advocates on behalf of faculty and students who have been subject to rights violations. Just a quick note about FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. They do tremendous work both in terms of traditional advocacy. They also do a yearly program where they review campus speech codes to ascertain their constitutionality. And last year they found that 39.6% of US campus free speech codes were unconstitutional, which was an improvement by 10% over the previous year, but is still pretty egregious. So Ari is going to be speaking about the state of free speech on campus, and we welcome him to Toronto.
Well, as you just heard, my name is Ari Cohn, and I'm an attorney with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And this question is going to be a lot more fun than it usually is, but how many here have heard of FIRE before? All right, that's a good amount, more than I expected. To really give you a basic summary of what we are is we are a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is, I've lost my cursor. All right, there we go. We are dedicated to the preservation of civil liberties on college and university campuses across the United States. And I want to thank, first of all, the Canadian Constitution Foundation for inviting me to be here today and for being such wonderful hosts. It's always fun to take a trip up here to Toronto. I don't want to spend too much time explaining what we do, which you can read much more about on our website, and Joanna mentioned one small sliver of what we do. But briefly, we work in many ways with students, faculty members, administrators, and all campus stakeholders to ensure that essential liberties fundamental to the mission of higher education are upheld on campus. We educate campus communities about their rights. We work collaboratively with administrators to reform policies that unduly infringe on student and faculty rights. And we also have a legislative program that lobbies federal and state legislators to assist in protecting those rights. Personally, what I do is I engage in advocacy on behalf of students and faculty who have faced or are facing violation of their rights. And when necessary, that includes a litigation project, which I am very proud to say has a 100% success rate in our 16-year history, 17 years, I guess now. So the title of my speech indicates that I'll be talking about the state of free speech on campus. So we'll get to that. And because FIRE only operates within the United States, my experience is primarily with US law and US campuses. But I've come to understand, because we keep tabs on these kinds of things, that there have been some free speech kerfuffles on Canadian campuses as well. And when I think of those, I think particularly of, first and foremost, the Jordan Peterson case here at the University of Toronto, who I'm sure you know has refused to use alternative gender-neutral pronouns, which has been a controversy in the United States at many universities too. I'm also thinking of the British Columbia Court of Appeal's recent ruling that the University of Victoria can revoke demonstration permits without any regard for students' expressive rights. And UBC's rescission of a speaking invitation to the 2010 Vancouver Olympic Games CEO. And one of my favorites, the cancellation of a 7-year-old yoga class at the University of Ottawa because it is cultural appropriation. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the rash of no platforming that has gone on campuses across Canada. where speakers are shut out of campus for espousing views that others disagree with or even perhaps find somewhat reprehensible. A word about my PowerPoint. I don't like to rely on them too much, so I'll refer to them for the fun stuff, and for the other stuff, they're kind of just there. What about our universities down in the United States? Well, Joanna stole my thunder, and let you know that the number of speech codes is down 10%. And I should say the number of the worst kinds of speech codes. Fire rates speech codes based on red, yellow, and green light rating, with red being policies that clearly violate students' constitutional rights, yellow light policies being those that are susceptible to interpretation or application in such a way that would violate students' rights, and green light policies, which are perfect, we love, we're happy to see them. So if you went by the numbers in FIRE's annual report on speech codes, our 2017 report would be pretty, it would indicate good things are happening. This is the lowest it has been in 10 years. And the number of schools, again, maintaining the red light policies went down 10 points, which is also the biggest decrease we've ever seen in one calendar year. And we're up to 27 green light schools. I remember when I started at FIRE, it was something like 7. So we've added 20 just in the past few years. 40% may sound high, but you should have seen how things were 5 or 6 years ago. It was upwards of 70 or 80% at that point. So if things are getting better, how is FIRE still in business and how am I still employed? It's a good question. One point I like to make is that even if the worst of the worst policies are in decline, more than 50% of the schools that we rate still have yellow light policies. And while red is worse than yellow, yellow is still bad and we're not going to stand for it. But on top of that, there's also the looming specter of the newest campus craze in speech codes, which is bias reporting teams. And these are a fun little contraption where the administration hires umpteen new people, because that's what administrations do. And those people are dedicated to assessing the situation whenever anybody has their feelings hurt or feels that they have had an incident of bias committed against them. And that has led to things like professors being hauled into class or into meetings with the administrator to talk about how they played devil's advocate in the course of giving their lecture. And that offended a student, and they should find different ways to phrase things, i.e. don't play devil's advocate and take that opposing view. That was at the University of Northern Colorado. But these bias reporting policies are the newest craze, and of course any administration that doesn't set one up is perceived as not being particularly sensitive to students' feelings and their emotional and psychological well-being. So naturally all administrators are leaping out of their seats to spend $250,000 creating a bias response team that does nothing but haul people in for incidents of protected speech. But even more indicative of the free speech problem on campuses in the US, I think, is the prevailing attitudes of students. And I'm going to highlight a couple of those for you. These might be hard to read, but... Oh, I can't get it together. There we go. So, all right, my computer is not like me right now. The number of students that are expected to protest on college campus is the highest it's ever been. And I'm not sure how closely you all follow US news, but the last year has been remarkable in its the roiling of campuses across the country following the University of Missouri football team's protest, which sparked kind of a nationwide surge in racial tensions and protests over racial tensions on campus. 53% in a January 2016 HuffPo YouGov poll said that colleges should punish students who make racially offensive statements. Only 38% said that colleges should prioritize free speech. 43% said that colleges should prioritize non-discrimination, even if it means limiting free speech, which is kind of a false dichotomy, but that's the way the question was asked. February 2016 UCLA study Support for banning racist and sexist speech among incoming college students is up to 70.9%. And 43% said colleges should have the right to ban extreme speakers. In a Pew Research Center poll, 40% of millennials responded that the government should protect minority groups against offensive statements, and said that the government should take action to stop people from making statements that minorities consider offensive. And finally, my favorite, and this is a little bit older, it's a 2010 study by the American Association of Colleges and Universities, surveyed 24,000 college students and 9,000 faculty members. That study found only 35.6% of students and only 16.7% of faculty strongly agreed with the following statement: "It is safe to hold unpopular views on campus." And I should note that that number decreased with each additional year that students had been there. By the time students had reached senior year, they'd become so cynical about their expressive rights that not only do they think it's not safe to express unpopular views, but merely holding unpopular views has become quote unquote unsafe on campus. And I hate using the word unsafe because of the way it's been bastardized, which I'll get to later. But these attitudes manifest themselves in practice. And as director of FIRE's Individual Rights Defense Program, the arm that advocates when these kinds of things happen, I can tell you I see this day in and day out. And I can also tell you that no matter what a school's policies, it could have the most glowing free speech policies, you better believe there's an administrator somewhere in that bureaucracy that can screw everything up for everyone. That's what bureaucrats do. So I'm going to give you a few fun examples of how it often plays out on our campuses. But first, a quick word about the state of the law in the United States, which differs fairly significantly from Canadian law. And I don't want to preach to the choir, but here we go. I'm going to give the 10,000-foot view. In the US, speech is protected by the First Amendment to the US Constitution, unless it's not. And it's what's not protected that differentiates the US from most countries. In the US, you most likely know, hate speech is generally protected by the First Amendment. Canada has a different approach to that. But the basic categories of unprotected speech in the US are obscenity, which is not mere vulgarity or lewdness or profanity. It has a very specific legal meaning that is pretty hard to meet, and if anybody manages to actually get there, I'd be impressed. Child pornography, which I probably shouldn't have to explain. True threats of violence, incitement to imminent lawless action, and words basically that if you said face to face to somebody, they'd reach back and smack you in the face. But that's limited to face-to-face interaction. A lot of people try and use this fighting words doctrine to say, well, you can't say mean things to other people on the internet because it's fighting words. Well, fortunately, you can't reach through the internet and punch somebody in the face, otherwise I'd be black and blue. So those are the broad categories of unprotected speech. Oh yeah, I like the little blood font, that really makes it for me. Now, free speech at public universities, it's actually another place where the US is pretty unique. The Supreme Court of the United States has extended those same speech protections to all public universities, which are state actors under US law. In the famous case of Healy versus James in 1972, when the court really first expressly said this, the court said that, quite to the contrary, the vigilant protection of constitutional freedoms is nowhere more vital than in the community of American schools. And a year later, it put that to the test when it reiterated this holding in a case coming from the University of Missouri, where a student was expelled for distributing an underground newspaper with a political cartoon depicting police raping the Statue of Liberty and an article titled "Motherfucker Acquitted." And the Supreme Court found that the University of Missouri's expulsion of this student on the grounds of common decency and good taste could not withstand constitutional scrutiny. And since then, there have been a number of precedents that have followed this general approach, and the fact that this has been the law since '72 and we're still fighting these things in court is fairly ridiculous. So the first way that we see free speech being inhibited on campus is what we call free speech zones, which is kind of Fire's in-house version of whack-a-mole. You beat one down and another one pops up somewhere else. But I want to start with a Fire favorite, even though it's a few years old now. In September 2013, Robert Van Tynen was handing out copies of the Constitution outside Modesto Junior College's Student Center in California on Constitution Day. He was a veteran, and he wanted to hand out pocket constitutions. He was stopped by the campus police, who informed him that any materials being distributed had to be approved by the Student Development Office. Rob pretty strongly argued that he had a First Amendment right to do exactly what he was doing. And then he went to the Student Development Office when the campus police officer didn't really buy his argument. Her administrator told him that because of a time, place, and manner, she forgot the word regulation after that, so she kept repeating the words time, place, and manner, which doesn't really mean anything out of context, that he can only pass out literature inside the quote-unquote free speech area, which she informed him is in front of the Student Center in that little cement area. And in case you were wondering, that's where that so-called free speech area is. It's 600 square feet. It's apparently so small that it can only accommodate 2 people at a time. And the administrator told Robert that because 2 people were already on campus speaking their minds, that he could try his free speech again in 10 days when the free speech area was open again. And according to Modesto's policies, students had to reserve that free speech area at least 5 days in advance and provide a copy of their ID, because nothing is scarier than not knowing who that person talking is. And each student could only use the free speech zone for 8 hours per semester. You were limited to 8 hours of free speech a semester. So in order for a reasonable time, place, and manner regulation to be constitutional under the First Amendment, it has to be content neutral, which this policy was. It didn't make a distinction based on what was being said. But it also has to be narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest, such as traffic flow or allowing classes to go on without disruption. And it also has to leave open ample alternative channels of communication. Free speech zones like Modesto's do the opposite of literally all of those things. There is nothing narrowly tailored about restricting student expression to a tiny portion of campus, requiring 5 days notice before exercising your expressive rights, and limiting students to 8 hours of free speech per semester. And Modesto should have known better, because many courts had previously held almost identical policies unconstitutional. So, what did we do? We helped file a lawsuit, and 4 months later, Modesto paid $50,000 and revised its policies. Unfortunately, Modesto had company. That very same day, Citrus College student Vincenzo Sinapi-Riddle was threatened with discipline for, quote unquote, having a political discussion outside of this campus's free speech zone, which was 1.37% of the campus. Perhaps more unbelievably, though, Fire had filed a lawsuit against Citrus College for the same exact policy 10 years before that, and it had settled out of court. And in the settlement agreement, Citrus College agreed to abolish this policy. Why they thought nobody would catch it if they snuck it back into their policies a decade later is beyond any of our comprehension. Citrus College also had this ridiculous flow chart, which demonstrates just how much of a hassle students had to put up with before exercising their rights. Don't worry, even if it were bigger and more readable, it still would not make any sense. I can't figure out how to schedule an event at Citrus College based on this. And a few months later, well, 2 students at the University of Hawaii Hilo were told they could not hand out copies of the Constitution or protest against NSA spying unless they were in their free speech zone, which really was more of a free speech puddle. And it comprised 0.26% of the University of Hawaii Hilo's campus. An administrator actually told them, this isn't about your rights. This isn't really the 60s anymore. People can't protest like that. I mean, very astute. It is indeed not the 60s anymore, but that's about the only thing she got right. And finally, because one more, just for good measure. In 2015, animal rights activist and Cal Poly Pomona student, Nicholas Tomas, was told that if he wanted to exercise his expressive rights, he would be limited to 0.01% of the campus. And he would also have to submit all materials for approval and wear this really creepy free speech badge while he was talking. Really creepy. As you might expect, we sued in all of these cases. Cal Poly Pomona paid $35,000. The University of Hawaii the University of Hawaii system, paid $50,000 and system-wide changed their policies, which we loved. And for utter chutzpah and gall, Citrus College had to pay $110,000 because seriously. So that's the free speech zone aspect of it. Free speech zones are on the decline, but like I said, another one pops up every day, and schools just kind of think that we're not going to notice when they suddenly institute these policies. They are wrong, and this is what keeps us in business, so they can keep doing it. One of the other major areas that we see violations of student rights is the misapplication of harassment law, particularly sexual and other discriminatory harassment law. This is one of my favorite cases ever. University of Hawaii Hilo, student newspaper, the Sun Star, did an April Fool's edition, and they were riffing off of somebody at a women's center event had made a joke about penis-shaped buildings. So they wrote an article, a fictitious article, about the construction of a vagina-shaped building on campus. They also published in a separate issue an article about cyberbullying with a Facebook confessions page. And there was one person who had particularly been targeted, and the Sun Star wrote an article about that kind of bullying and asked the student, do you want us to black out your name? And the student had said, no, I want people to know there's a human cost to this. Please do not blur out my name. I want to be known as the face of this. So they wrote the article. Well, a professor filed 2 complaints, one claiming that the vagina-shaped building article constituted sexual harassment, and the other that the article naming the student who had asked to be named created an unsafe environment for that student and all women, and it was also sexual harassment. By the way, the article wasn't the only thing that caused a sexual harassment complaint. The Sun Star actually included an image with it, which I just love. It's from the 1998 movie Patch Adams. But this is apparently sexual harassment in a fictitious satirical article. Well, the University of Alaska Fairbanks conducted not 1, not 2, but 3 different investigations at different levels. They conducted an investigation, found the harassment complaints unfounded. Then they reviewed that with another investigation because a professor said, I'm not happy with that result. And then when she wasn't happy when they declined her allegations again, they sent it to an outside law firm. All in all, it was 11 months of investigation that the student newspaper was under. These students were terrified. They would not write anything that could even possibly offend someone. They were just utterly petrified that they were going to get thrown out of school if they wrote anything that even came close to the line. After about 11 months, when we got wind of it, we sent a letter, and that quickly wrapped things up from the University of Alaska's standpoint. But similar investigations for punishments based on harassment is an increasingly common tactic used to silence speech. Another one of my all-time favorite and most ridiculous cases. Keith John Sampson, a student at the Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, which, yes, is a stupid name for a school, was also a janitor who was putting himself through college. In the break room one day, he was reading a book called Notre Dame versus the Klan, How the Fighting Irish Defeated the Ku Klux Klan. It was about how 2 Notre Dame students literally fought the Ku Klux Klan when they came to campus. This is the cover of that book. Somebody saw him reading that book and reported him for racial harassment. Not only did they report him for racial harassment, but IUPUI's Affirmative Action Office found him guilty of racial harassment. The AAO alleged that by reading a book on the KKK in the break room, Sampson had engaged in racial harassment, and Sampson, when faced with this, said the book was a historical account of the event of 2 days in May 1924 when they actually fought the Klan. It was an anti-Klan book. His explanation was dismissed, and he received a letter saying he'd been found guilty of racial harassment. Notably, The administrator wrote that his failures included, and I'm quoting, openly reading the book related to a historically and racially abhorrent subject. And fire got involved and eventually was able to get that wiped from his record, but it took way longer than it should have. The fact that they found him guilty in the first place is insanity. George Washington University, Jewish student goes to India on spring break and discovers that, lo and behold, the swastika is actually an ancient symbol of fortune and good luck. Brings back that small souvenir and puts it on the bulletin board of his fraternity hallway and waits around to kind of just, it was a predominantly Jewish fraternity, to talk to people, like relaying his information. He eventually left to get breakfast because he was a college student and had better things to do. And somebody saw it and called the police. Literally called the police. And then the president of George Washington University urged the Metropolitan Police Department to investigate this as a hate crime. And then they, of course, filed the discriminatory harassment charges, disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, what have you, all because a Jewish student placed a souvenir swastika on his predominantly Jewish fraternity's bulletin board for the purpose of educating his peers. Apparently, you can be discriminatory towards your own kind simply by talking to them. Who knew? More recently, disturbing the peace at Winthrop University, a group of students put up this display. It's hard to see, but there's just some like black bodies made out of beanbags and whatnot hanging from the tree. And the sign says Tillman's Legacy. It was outside a dorm called Tillman Hall. Tillman was a figure in South Carolina, a political figure, and under his governorship, lynchings had increased. These students were protesting that this building was named after somebody who oversaw a period in time where people were repeatedly lynched. The university got wind of the art installation right outside of the dormitory and charged the spokesman for that artist collective with disturbing the peace and disorderly conduct because people hadn't really known what the purpose of the art installation was, and it caused a bit of a ruckus. Of course, as Fire pointed out to Winthrop University, the fact that people might have misinterpreted the art installation doesn't mean that it's not protected speech. In the end, the school actually dropped the charges and, in fact, gave the student an opportunity to host a panel explaining the artwork and paid for by the university, so that it worked out okay in the end. And this one just makes me sad. Northern Michigan University had a ban on discussing thoughts of self-harm with one's peers. Presumably, they were operating on the old, outdated belief that talking about suicidal ideations actually creates a suicide problem and spreads the issue. But not only is that not the prevailing psychological understanding from at least what I understand, but the fact of the matter is to punish somebody for speaking to one's peers about the problems they're having is utterly reprehensible, for lack of a better phrase. This one caused a shitstorm, pardon my French. We issued a couple of press releases about this, and now the US Department of Justice is investigating Northern Michigan University for it, and they very quickly pulled down the policy and never admitted to doing anything wrong. So they're still on my shit list. This one is very meta, and this I think is going to be one of my last examples. The University of South Carolina, a student had a free speech event where he put up posters on his table of past fire cases. Here is the speech that has been censored on this campus, on this campus, on this campus. Well, guess what happened? Lots of harassment complaints and bias incident reports and what have you. And he was called into administrators' offices and repeatedly investigated because he displayed protected speech that had been censored on other campuses. The people who filed the complaints said, I saw a swastika and I was offended. They clearly didn't look close enough to understand what the purpose of it was, and it wasn't just a willy-nilly swastika laying around, and frankly, even if it was, it still would be protected speech. So these are a lot of the ways in which we see censorship cropping up on campuses. Those are just a select few of our most ridiculous cases, and I have a list, probably 17 more that I thought about throwing in here, but in the interest of time, I can't. Go to our website and look at it. You'll be left with your mouth hanging open more than once, I promise. But another primarily student-led trend tracked by FIRE, and this is relevant to Canada because it's happened here, is what we like to call disinvitation, where students attempt to prevent controversial speakers from appearing on campus, whether at a commencement ceremony or a lecture or what have you. Since 2000, FIRE has cataloged well over 300 such attempts, with about half of them being successful. This year actually saw 44 attempts at disinviting controversial speakers, which is not only more than double last year, but the most of any year we've ever seen, which was dismaying because last year the number dipped considerably down to 21 from the 30s it had been in the previous year. Disinvitation attempts come from across the political spectrum and are aimed at anyone from President Obama to George W. Bush to Condoleezza Rice to Madeleine Albright and, I'm not kidding, Mr. Rogers and Big Bird. The problem with disinvitation is that if ideological purity tests for speakers are implemented, we're not going to end up with anybody being able to say much of anything on campus. There's nobody that we all agree with 100% on everything. And the idea that we can't learn from people who we disagree with, or at least learn from interacting with them, is fatally flawed and is counter to the entire enterprise of higher education and critical thinking and logic skills. And a recent, well, not so recent anymore, but fairly recent example sticks in my mind. In February of last year, a Williams College student, a student group appropriately named Uncomfortable Learning, invited a fellow by the name of John Derbyshire to speak on campus. I am not entirely familiar with him, but he apparently is kind of racist. Williams College President Adam Falk canceled the event, proclaiming that Derbyshire's views were over the line of what free speech means at Williams College. And Williams College is a private college, so theoretically it has the legal right to do that. But its policies also promise free speech to its students, and we're going to hold them accountable to that. He said that Derbyshire's speech constituted hate speech, and it was his opinion that it was therefore the role of educators to step in and make a decision for the students to prevent them from harming themselves. Well, the kicker, and it's a good one, the president of Uncomfortable Learning, Zach Woods, who invited Derbyshire, was black. Woods invited Derbyshire for the purpose of bringing his views out into the open so he could publicly refute them and help educate his classmates on the flaws in Derbyshire's theories. But President Falk apparently knew better about what black students can handle and decided that wasn't their call to make. It was a staggering incident of condescending paternalism. And while Derbyshire's disinvitation was an administrative-led effort, generally these things originate within the student body. You see petitions left and right, especially with Milo Yiannopoulos' speaking tours recently. It's impossible to have not heard of that, so I won't go into the ugly details of those. But when Ben Shapiro, former Breitbart editor, was protested at California State University, Los Angeles, the president canceled the speech in response also. This was shortly thereafter. And only after the student group threatened litigation did the president reverse his decision and allow the event to go on. Of course, then protesters mobbed the doors and the event didn't really go on because somebody pulled the fire alarm and what have you, and the lawsuit ended up getting filed anyway, of course, and that's still winding its way through the lovely, very speedy wheels of the United States justice system. The disinvitation trend, though, has been on the rise over the past 5 years, and unfortunately it shows no real sign of abating. So why is all this happening? Why are students beginning to replace freedom of speech with freedom from speech? There's no simple answer, but there's a couple of ideas. Fire President Greg Lukianoff wrote an article about a year ago in The Atlantic called The Coddling of the American Mind with psychologist John Haidt. And in that article, he makes the argument that we're teaching our children that the world is a big and scary place and that they're not equipped to deal with it. And we're teaching students to catastrophize and to use emotional reasoning instead of critical thinking. So students are going to college and they are under the impression that whatever they feel is reality, and not only that, but whatever bad things they feel is the complete and utter end of the world as they know it. And that, of course, is going to lead to exactly the anti-speech attitudes that we see. And really, in my opinion, the problem begins well before that. It begins in primary school education. First of all, we're not teaching kids the importance of free speech. We're not teaching kids the values and the ideals behind it rather than as a strict legal concept. The logic behind freedom of speech, we're not teaching that. We're sure as hell not teaching civics like we used to either. But on top of that, we're also not allowing children to fail these days in the era of participation trophies for every child and the constant inflation of grades and what have you, in such a way that we don't want our children to feel failure. The problem is they're going to eventually, and when they do, and you haven't prepared them for it, it's gonna be ugly. We're not teaching students to confront problems head on. We're teaching them to seek protection and to use that emotional reasoning. And frankly, another reason why this is happening is because it works. Administrators are acceding to these demands. They want to be seen as reasonable and empathetic and sensitive. And when you can go to an administrator and say, I don't like what that person is saying, shut them up, it's way easier than formulating a rational, logical, and thought-out argument against whatever it is they're saying. And I don't know about you, but college-age me certainly would have taken the easy way out every single time. So it's really no surprise. And when administrators signal to students that their requests for protection from offensive speech is going to be met, it only encourages them to continue seeking that refuge. The other issue, as I see it personally, is that we're not talking about free speech properly. And I give entire lectures on this, but I'm going to distill it down to the basics. Again, we're not effectively communicating the importance of free speech. Mere citation to the ideal of freedom of speech oftentimes wins in the court of law. It very rarely wins in the court of public opinion, however. We have to give people the reasons why they should support free speech. And before we do that, we have to commit to engaging people on an accessible level and doing it with a measure of empathy rather than slinging accusation and barbs, which is what the free speech debates often turn into. Free speech can be a difficult concept. It should be a difficult concept. Grappling with this is not easy, and it's emotional, and it's going to touch the core identities of a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And it does no harm to the freedom of speech to acknowledge that. So we have to get on each other's level and talk to people like human beings about free speech rather than as political enemies. And I could, again, go on about that for a long time, but I have 5 minutes left, so I want to touch on one more topic, and that is safe spaces and trigger warnings, because those are big ones. Safe spaces, to be brief, are not bad in theory. Safe spaces originated back in the days when I think commonly accepted that LGBT people could not really congregate without fear of actually physical violence. Safe spaces gave them a place to talk amongst themselves, to express themselves without that fear. And used in that sense, safe spaces actually enhanced freedom of speech. Unfortunately, they've been weaponized, and they're now being used as a sword instead of a shield, where all of campus has to be a safe space, and if you say something that I disagree with vehemently, well, then you have made all of campus an unsafe space for me, and therefore you must shut up or get off campus. That is not the safe spaces that the creators of the concept would have identified or really frankly even liked. When you see student groups holding safe space events to hide from ideas of speakers they find controversial rather than hearing those speakers out, It's problematic. We are allowing students to evade not only their responsibility to actually grapple with ideas and formulate their own arguments, but we're robbing them of the essential skills they'll need to participate in civilized democracy once they leave campus. And frankly, these attitudes also will carry through after they leave campus, and then it becomes a societal issue writ large. Because then you have students who graduate, become relatively functional adults, and expect the rest of the world to live by the same rules that they had at their college campus. So safe spaces used in that way are a problem. Trigger warnings. On the other hand, I'm going to skip some of these. They're not as massive of an issue as people seem to think. The incidence of trigger warnings being mandated is actually very, very low. Less than 1% of professors in a survey reported that their institution had an official policy on trigger warnings. So it's not a huge issue in terms of people being mandated to have them, which frankly, if a professor is forced to have trigger warnings, that would be an infringement on their academic freedom rights. It should be up to the professor to choose whether or not they want to offer such a content warning. But a few general thoughts on trigger warnings. So obviously trigger warnings are content warnings saying you might find something in this material to be disturbing. You might find it to be upsetting. Be on guard. They originated from internet message boards back in the day, mostly relating to sexual assault issues. If you've experienced sexual assault, this piece might trigger some really bad memories for you. The problems with trigger warnings is that they're out of control. They're impossible. People have requested trigger warnings for everything from body image to classism to incarceration. Basically any ism you can think of, even the ones that don't exist, people have requested trigger warnings for them. And you also have had trigger warnings demanded for classic pieces of literature like The Great Gatsby and Ovid's Metamorphoses. Like everything, Things Fall Apart has faced requests for trigger warnings, demands for trigger warnings. The problem is very few people actually suffer from PTSD, very small percentage. Those that do are not going to be helped by trigger warnings in a class. They're going to be helped by actual psychiatric care. And the problem is that triggers can be anything. It can be the way that the light comes in through the window. It can be a smell. It can be the way the shoe sounds hitting the floor. Anything can be a trigger, and it is impossible to predict what will trigger somebody. And if we try to assume that we can just filter out all these bad feelings by providing trigger warnings because of some words, we're in for a nasty surprise. The problem with them, the further problem with them is that they affect people that don't have PTSD. Even if you do have PTSD, the rest of the class has now been provided this warning. What does that do? That shades their reading of the material. That shades their understanding. It may make them see things that they wouldn't have otherwise seen. And it improperly places the focus on whatever that quote-unquote troubling content is, instead of what might be the actual point of the piece, which has nothing to do with that ancillary idea or word. So they're also unhelpful. Most psychiatrists have said that there is no extant medical literature that says providing trigger warnings actually helps anyone with PTSD. Many actually dispute the fact that reading about somebody else's experience can trigger flashbacks of one's own experience because of the separation between oneself and others. And I'm very quickly running out of time, so I'm going to propose a solution, and that is that students who actually need trigger warnings go to a university's disability office and request an accommodation. And the professor can work it out with that student individually. That safeguards students who actually have a legitimate reason for this, while also not necessarily, I wouldn't say ruining it, but affecting the educational experience of every single other person in that room. And I would also like to say one thing is that the way trigger warnings are used now are prone to abuse. People have been requesting trigger warnings for absolute nonsense, like, I don't want to read this book about 9/11 because my parents saw the Twin Towers fall, so it's triggering me because of something my parents experienced. Abuse like that is going to happen with college students. It's inevitable. The problem is, it's anathema to question one's lived experience these days. If you dare question that somebody has experienced trauma, forget about it. It's pitchforks and torches for you. So there's no real way to rein that in. I have some other thoughts on trigger warnings, but I definitely have already gone past the 5 minutes that I was warned about. So I guess question and answers now?
So I'll start off with one question, and this touches on what you mentioned just at the end about lived experience being beyond question in our current climate. And it seems to me, and I just wonder if you agree, that it's kind of an old-fashioned idea that certain perspectives are absolute and privileged above other ones, and there's no collaboration. So, lived female experience or lived black experience are just posed as absolute and aren't up for debate or discussion. It seems like actually very retroactive as an idea, even though I know that, intersubjectivity and things like that are posed as being on the, cutting edge of social science research, but it seems to me that it's actually very retrograde.
Absolutely, and really, I mean, one of the things that strikes me is exactly that, the absolutism and the unwillingness to question. And that really poses a significant danger, not only to college students' critical thinking skills, but to our general body of knowledge as a society, as humanity. If you can't ask the difficult questions, I mean, when the bell curve came out that questioned whether race and IQ were related and whether certain races had lower IQs, the fact that the question had been asked caused such a maelstrom of backlash. And at the end of the day, does the question hurt somebody? No, the question doesn't hurt somebody. And what if that question has an answer that you wouldn't expect? If we can't ask the questions, we're never going to find the quote-unquote truth. But the fact of the matter is we can never actually ascertain truth, and we always have to keep questioning. That's why we have our system of what Jonathan Rauch calls liberal science, where we rigorously check ideas in the public square and discard ones that are found unworthy, and sometimes that takes a while, but that's how we build our body of knowledge as a human society.
Hi, thank you for that very interesting talk. I'm going to ask you about the Jordan Peterson controversy.
I was expecting this.
I think there's a distinction to be made between his kind of inquiry about whether or not he ought to be held to this rule and his academic discussion of this. And I personally think it was abhorrent that the administration kind of censured him for speaking out about it. He is protected by both free speech and academic freedom. On the other hand, I think about what would or ought to happen if he were to follow through and speak to a trans student using a pronoun that trans student felt was offensive to their identity. And I wonder where free speech ends and labor relations, employer-employee relations begin. Because if we accept the premise that speaking to a trans student using an incorrect pronoun is equivalent to speaking to a black student using the N-word, I don't think anyone would balk at an employee being fired by an employer for calling a student the N-word.
So I think there's a distinction we have to make. First of all, and I could be wrong about this, but from my understanding, Professor Peterson actually said, if whatever the student wants to be identified, be it male or female, I will respect that wish. It's only the gender-neutral pronouns that he objected to. So I do think that actually intentionally misgendering someone, if a trans student is called by the opposite pronoun that they choose, I actually think that at some point there may be a sexual harassment issue there based on gender identity. I think that can, under the right circumstance, possibly constitute sexual harassment. And I think most reasonable people would agree with that. Now it gets tricky again where you say with the alternative pronouns that aren't accepted across the board or recognized across the board. I'm of two minds because, like you, I'm sympathetic to the argument, and I'm very prone to give credence to an individual's autonomy to do, basically do what they want with their lives. On the other hand, I guess if I could have been addressed as Your Highness throughout college, I probably would have. There's a point, again, to which it can be taken to an extreme and kind of made a farce of, almost, which I actually think is to the detriment of everybody, and most importantly, the trans students, when that gets taken to its extreme and becomes a laughing stock instead. So it's a really tough question, and this is one of those issues where I do think that, again, part of the problem is that we're not talking to each other like human beings with emotions and reasonable, feelings about this kind of stuff. And, the tyranny of feelings is easy to fall under, but I don't think that it's harmful to freedom of speech to account for other people's feelings. So I think it's a really difficult question. But I certainly think that Professor Peterson was well within his rights to speak up and criticize as he did, and that much I will say.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Cohen, thank you very much for FIRE's efforts in general and for the presentation you just gave. I'm just about, I'm just about ready to vomit. I would like to ask two quick questions.
Sure.
First thing is, further to what you said about what you believe is causing this, and you took it all the way back to childhood and fear of failure. Would you say that it's also perhaps one of two things, or both: ignorance of previous authoritarian regimes, Soviet Union, the Nazis, Idi Amin, Pol Pot, etc., or do you think it's just mental illness?
I definitely think ignorance plays a large role in it. Frankly, yeah. I think that when you hit secondary education, everyone should have to read On Liberty by John Stuart Mill, and we'd have a lot fewer problems than we do today. I think ignorance plays a large part of it, but I think, I wouldn't necessarily use the phrase mental illness, but we do enable certain bad emotional reasoning habits, like I said, and it's certainly, it's a problem that we perpetuate, whether consciously or not, but more consciously than not, I think. So I think it's a combination of all of the above.
Because it's sort of I guess you could say, the externalization of power, where the freedom is not in your mind and you don't have it naturally. It has to be given to you by some institution or some authority.
Well, and there's also the interplay of the power of victimization these days, and I don't think we can ignore that. It's a real thing. The more one is seen as a victim of some kind of social wrong, the more power they have, particularly on college campuses in certain circles. And of course, that's how you end up with things like the University of Virginia sexual assault fiasco with Rolling Stone, and that's how those things blow up. That kind of the victimhood status issue is a real one, and it's unfortunately getting worse, I think.
And second, according to your experience and your records that you've gathered over the years, what do you recall as the very first instance that a free speech zone was constructed by an educational institution and then used to abridge or completely eliminate free speech?
Oh man, the first time. I would think they go back probably, well past the 60s and 70s, maybe the 80s or so, when campuses really started to think about having rules about speech. But we've seen them everywhere. We've seen free speech gazebos, free speech basketball courts. We've seen just about any stupid thing you could possibly imagine designated the free speech area. And the prevalence has fallen, but we've still got hundreds of campuses out there with policies like this, and particularly community colleges, which seem to share all of their policy sourcing from one big book of really terrible policies. Because they're all almost word for word exactly the same. It's ridiculous. It's like somebody decided to write a big book of terrible policies and give it to all of the community colleges in the United States.
Well, I asked because the first time I ever heard the term free speech zone was around 2002, and it was used by, I guess, in the first term of Bush the Younger's administration to limit protest. And they said, well, you can only protest the inauguration of George Bush in this particular very small area, and if you do it anywhere else, you'll be arrested. So that's the First Amendment. It's number one for a reason. So
It definitely predates that.
Yeah.
They were definitely around on campuses before.
okay, thank you very much.